So welcome. I'm Mark Herzl of American Honda Motor Company, and it's my privilege as the second vice president and chair of the programs committee of your Foreign Trade Association to welcome you today to today's webinar. A couple of housekeeping notes. First, to let you know that all attendees, we'd ask that you be in listen-only mode and continue to be on mute and have your camera off. If you have a question for today's speakers, we ask that you type it into the chat box or save it for the end of the presentation when we'll unmute all those in attendance so you could verbally ask. But the speakers have asked that you just put it in as it comes up, and they'll address it as it relates to their conversation. The Foreign Trade Association has some upcoming webinars in the next few weeks and months. On October 27th, Steve Hughes will talk about the cause and effect of the soaring spot rates and what the future holds. November 18th, we have an update on the CBP Center of Excellence and Expertise from Electronics Center Director George Garcia. On December 8th, we have an event with the centralized examination stations of LA Long Beach, and all of them will be talking about their different products and how to keep your cargo flowing through the process. Also, working with today's sponsor, the Port of Long Beach, on maybe an event talking about some of the logistical benefits of the Gerald Desmond Bridge replacement, and then talking to KMPG about a forced labor webinar in January, as well as another event following our 2019 event on emerging technologies and blockchain and logistics in either January or February. So if you're interested in these topics and you aren't already a member of the Foreign Trade Association to enjoy the special FTA member pricing for the events, we're offering a 50% off corporate and one company representative memberships for new members from now until the end of December. So corporate memberships regularly $300, or excuse me, regularly $600 are now $300, and one company representatives regularly $300, now $150. And to qualify as a new member, you must there must be at least an 18-month lapse in your previous membership of an individual or a company that was a member who's moved off of a company. So as the attorneys always remind us, other conditions and restrictions may apply. Visit our website and learn more about it today. Today, our presentation is sponsored by the Port of Long Beach, the port of choice. The Port of Long Beach is also home to the newly completed replacement for the Gerald Desmond Bridge. And if you've not yet had a chance to cross that bridge, which connects the 710 freeway to the facilities that flow cargo throughout the San Pedro Bay and to the rest of the world, I highly encourage you to do so. Who knows, maybe the bridge will be part of today's discussion. For the next 45 minutes or so, we'll be discussing the state of West Coast port competitiveness with two of the most respected people on the waterfront. No, these aren't longshoremen armed with box hooks. Our guests today are armed with pens, and their prose is read, considered, and debated, not just here on the West Coast, but around the world. John Mclaren is the president of the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association, the PMSA, with offices in Oakland, Long Beach, and Seattle. The PMSA is a West Coast Maritime Trade Association representing ocean carriers and marine terminal operators and a variety of local, state, and federal issues. John has been with the PMSA in his current role since 1995. He has a bachelor's degree in political science from UC Davis and a law degree from the Southern University School of Law. He has previously served on numerous industry and community boards of directors, and in 2013 he received the Connie Award from the Container Intermodal Institute. And John is a frequent contributor to trade publications and remains active in programs for children with and adults with autism. On the other side of this afternoon's version of the Saturday Night Classic verbal duel between Jane Curtin and Dan Aykroyd, this counterpoint will be Bill Mongaluzzo. Bill is a senior editor in Long Beach for the Journal of Commerce. The JOC is one of the longest continuing publications in the U.S., and it was founded in New York in 1827, and is considered the authority on intermodal transportation logistics. Bill has served the Journal of Commerce since 1980 and has reported over the years from JOC's offices in New Orleans, New York, and Long Beach. He's a native of Chicago and a graduate of the University of Missouri School of Journalism, and has a master's in histories from the University of New Orleans. So, gentlemen, let's keep it clean today, and I'll turn it over to you, Bill.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mark. Thanks for that great introduction. So what I'm going to do today is start with some brief remarks, and I scripted it in such a way that I anticipate that John Mclaren will have some responses to what I say, and then also I'm hoping to get some questions or comments from the listeners. And if you just go ahead and whenever these questions pop into your mind, use the chat function, send it in, and we'll work those into our discussion too. So I'm going to discuss 3 topics today. These will be mostly LA Long Beach centric, although in some instances they apply to all the West Coast ports. Number 1, why are we experiencing congestion today in Los Angeles, Long Beach? 2, what is the impact, the operational impact of channeling so much volume through this gateway in such a short period of time? And then 3rd, I'm going to discuss the cost disadvantages of West Coast ports, relying heavily on an excellent study that was commissioned by the Pacific Maritime Association and performed by Mercator International. Okay, those of you who ship through LA Long Beach or are in the transportation sector, you know by now that retailers, the big box retailers and the online retailers have chosen Los Angeles Long Beach as their gateway of choice for handling the surge of US imports, which began in late June after the US economy began to open up following the COVID-19 pandemic, which of course we're still right in the thick of. So according to JOC affiliate peers, the volume increases in Southern California have been huge. In August, the volume of US imports from Asia moving through the Southern California gateway increased 20% from August of 2019. Once again, in September, another 20% increase compared to September of last year. And from all indications, it looks like October will be at least as big a month. So just to put this into context, and remember, we've been talking for years now about West Coast ports losing market share to East and Gulf Coast ports, while LA and Long Beach have been growing by 20% year over year each month. New York, New Jersey grew by about 10%, grew its import volumes, and Savannah, Charleston, Houston, whatever, 5-6% increase. So the retailers have really come back to LA Long Beach, let's say. Why is that? Well, you get the fastest all-in transit times from Asia to the interior US through the West Coast and through LA Long Beach. Here you have 1.8 billion square feet of industrial warehouse distribution space. And you can defer if you're an importer, a major importer, and you have outlets across the country, you can defer your decision on the final destination in the US until that cargo reaches Southern California. However, if you decide, well, I'm going to ship this through New York, New Jersey, or Norfolk, you have to make that decision 30 days before the vessel gets to those destinations. So in a rapidly changing environment, consumer environment, you want to hold on to your cargo till the last minute before you direct it to its final destination. Okay, so the volumes have been huge in recent months. What impact is this having operationally on the ports? Well, let's start with the marine terminal. Yes, congestion, significant congestion. What's happening is the import containers are coming in so rapidly that the terminals are having trouble processing the containers through the gates and making room for the next vessel arrival. So as these containers build up at the terminals, and remember we have 12 container terminals here, the stacks get higher and wider and deeper, and that compromises the maneuverability of the RTG operators, the top handlers. They in effect have to move containers around 2-3 times as much as they normally would to get to the container for which the trucker has shown up. So this is creating an artificial, and I put that in quotes, shortage of labor. I mean, we have just as many longshoremen as we've ever had. It's really taking up the time of the equipment operators, and their productivity is reduced because their maneuverability has been impacted. So then let's go to the gate. After reaching record low turn times in this summer through the efforts of the Harbor Trucking Association and the individual terminal operators, the turn times have started to increase. This happened in August and again in September. Now these are not, back at the levels they were 2 years ago when it was over 100 minutes, your average turn time. It's, it's in the 70s, which is not great, but it's not horrible either. But this delays the truckers and it cuts down on their productivity. And then things get even worse when you get to the warehouses. The warehouses are chock-a-block. So the inbound container on a chassis is brought to the warehouse. They can't attend to it immediately. So it sits there on their property. And that, according to the pool of pools, which is operated by the 3 intermodal equipment providers, the average, they call it street dwell time, is up to 7.1 days. That's twice what it should be. Ties up the chassis, and the result, of course, there's a shortage of chassis throughout the region. So then you layer on top of all of that, trying to get the containers unloaded, transloaded, whatever, at the warehouses. There's a shortage of over-the-road trucking and intermodal rail. So, and on top of that, the rates have really gone sky high. So you put all of that together, and the entire supply chain is really cramped, and it's not due to any faults really of the operators, although I'm sure, we may get some dissension on that point. I think everybody's trying their best, but it's literally trying to put that proverbial 5 pounds of flour into a 1 pound bag. It just doesn't fit. Okay, so what are the cost disadvantages? These are here. This is not just during this period of time, but the cost disadvantages that West Coast ports experience compared to East and Gulf Coast ports. And this is based on a recent study commissioned by the Pacific Maritime Association and performed by the consulting group Mercator. Their conclusion is that when you're talking about U.S. imports from Asia to most destinations within the U.S., the East and Gulf Coast ports have what that's called a route cost advantage. In other words, it's cheaper by several $100s to ship through East and Gulf Coast ports versus the West Coast ports. Now they really, slice it and dice it, Mercator does, and gets down to the individual cost components. And those include the terminal operating handling costs, the port lease charges, environmental regulations, which we'll probably hear more about from John Mclaren, But primarily it is the intermodal rail cost. So according to Mercator, the Eastern railroads, the CSX and Norfolk Southern, charge 67 to 70 cents per mile. The Western railroads, the UP and BNSF, charge 77 cents per mile. So that 7 to 10 cents per mile difference becomes magnified when you consider that the distance from the West Coast to your major population centers, such as Chicago, Kansas City, Dallas, Columbus, Ohio, Detroit, Atlanta, you're talking 2,000 miles plus. Whereas for the ports, that distance is probably 600 miles or less to those same destinations. So you put it all together and you are talking about a route cost disadvantage for the West Coast ports of at least $300. Let's take it a step further. The Canadian West Coast ports of Vancouver and Prince Rupert, the Northwest Seaport Alliance of Seattle and Tacoma did a study, and recent study, and let's say you're a shipper in Chicago, you're an importer. You have a choice to ship from Shanghai through Vancouver, Prince Rupert, or through Seattle, Tacoma. And the same cost would apply to LA Long Beach. The cost differential is $400 to $600. So in other words, you're an importer in Chicago, you could save $400 to $600 per container to ship through the Canadian gateways than through the US West Coast gateways. And why is that? It is because of the intermodal rates that are charged by the Western railroads. Now, there are some other cost factors in there, marine terminal handling charges, but they're very insignificant compared to the total route cost from shipping through these other ports. So, is that going to change? I doubt it. The Western railroads charge based on profit, not on market share. However, the Canadian railroads love market share, and they will charge what they feel are compensatory rates in order to continue to grow their market share, which they have significantly. Vancouver, not very long ago, maybe 10 years ago, something like 5% of the cargo that they handled there was US origin or destination cargo. Now it's over 25%. So that really is the major challenge faced by the West Coast ports. So I will conclude with a solution. And this solution has been expressed many times by Mario Cordero and Gene Soroka. The best and possibly the only solution for the West Coast ports to regain market share is to increase the efficiency and reduce the operational cost of calling at West Coast ports. And this includes the terminal operator, the handoff from the terminal operator to the trucker and to the railroad. We just have to be more efficient, and we have to do it as inexpensively as possible. But we have to remember that, like all of our children who are convinced that they have the dumbest parents in the world, when it's crunch time, they come home to mom and dad. And today, the big box retailers and the e-commerce retailers are coming back to LA Long Beach. So it's up to LA Long Beach and other West Coast ports to be as efficient as they can. So John, hand it over to you.
Hey, thanks, Bill. I guess this is my opportunity to correct your spelling and punctuation. I just want to say thanks to the Foreign Trade Association for being on this panel, and certainly being with Bill, who I've known for quite a number of years, probably more than we care to admit. And he's somebody that I have a tremendous amount of respect for. Though after all these years, I'm still waiting for that free admission to the TPM conference. But maybe 1 year. Also like to thank the Port of Long Beach for their sponsorship of today's event. So thanks to them for helping put this together. I'm going to respond to a couple of things that Bill brought up, and then I'm going to veer off into another topic that Bill mentioned. But in terms of the amount of volume that's he talked about, at the end of the day, we're moving a heck of a lot of volume, and we're still in the middle of a crisis. And I think that's a tribute to everybody in the supply chain and the ability to work under really tough circumstances that may get tougher depending on which epidemiologist you see on TV in the coming weeks and months. So hopefully we'll all be able to continue moving all this cargo, and hopefully everybody will stay safe and well while that's going on. I'm going to talk about today environmental and climate change policy and its potential impact on the supply chain. And in fact, a little stronger than that, I think it will have an impact on California's supply chain. And Bill talked about it a little bit in terms of the costs that were examined in the Mercator study. Most of you are familiar, but in late September, California Governor Gavin Newsom issued an executive order that requires the sale of all new passenger vehicles in the state of California to be zero emission by 2035. And that received an awful lot of media coverage. What didn't receive as much coverage was the other parts of the executive order, which requires the California Air Resources Board to develop regulations mandating that all medium and heavy duty trucks be zero emission by 2035. And also that port drayage trucks and off-road vehicles and equipment, which would include marine terminal equipment, be zero emission by 2035. That comes on top of a lot of other efforts that have gone on that I think we're all familiar with over the past couple of years, like the Ports of LA and Long Beach Clean Air Action Plan, which requires marine terminals to be zero emission by 2030, port drayage trucks to be zero emission by 2035. The implementation and now the expansion of CARB's cold ironing regulations, which require ships to plug in. And I apologize for if you hear the train in the background, that's an empty Amtrak train going by, I'm fairly certain. And they were empty prior to the virus also. So not a big change there. So ships have to utilize shoreside electrical power. And the original rules were for container ships and for cruise ships. Well, the rule is now going to be expanded for bulk, break bulk, ro-ro, and tankers. We also have local air districts moving forward with indirect source rules for warehouses and distribution centers, rail yards, ports, and other such facilities, which will again require zero emission equipment which call at those facilities. And depending on how the rule is written, will not only result in additional costs for you to be in compliance, or potentially restrictions on your business activity at those locations in order to fall below the thresholds that are set, or to subject you to fines and penalties if you exceed whatever the thresholds which are set. So when you combine all of these costs, it results in tens upon tens of billions of dollars to California's supply chain. And those costs aren't imposed on any other trade gateway in North America. And I believe is a factor that has contributed to the decades now loss of market share suffered by California ports. I think we have to be pretty realistic. nothing's going to change our California's or change California's environmental or climate change policies, and probably for good reason. I think the goals are admirable, obviously, both from a public health standpoint and from a climate change perspective. And I think the governor's executive order was done in light of things that we've experienced and read about over the last couple of years. If you live in California, we have had multiple years now, and every year the fires just keep getting bigger, having more impact, destroying an awful lot of property, killing people, and that doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. We've proceeded to have this year multiple extraordinary heat events, which ironically, the state of California came to the maritime industry and asked us not to plug our ships in during these heat events in order to redistribute the power back out to the grid to try to keep the power on in the rest of the state of California. And we've certainly read about rising sea levels and the impact on glaciers and snowpacks and what have you. So nothing's going to change from that standpoint. And I think what California is trying to do in the absence of any kind of federal leadership over the last couple of years, they want to be leaders in the fight against climate change. But in order to be a leader, others have to follow. And we're not seeing that in terms of other states, other ports, other gateways. People aren't adopting the same environmental or climate change policies that we're seeing here in California. So I think rule number one is do no harm in any kind of policy. And if you want to achieve your climate goals here in California, you need to avoid causing greater problems or harm than what you're trying to fix. So a couple of years ago, our organization hired a consultant and did a study that looked at the movement of cargo from various ports in the Far East to inland destinations in the United States. And don't hold me to it because I always get the locations wrong, but I think it was Chicago, Memphis, Kansas City, but I might have had some of the locations wrong. Using different pathways, routes, and gateways. So making use of West Coast ports and Gulf and East Coast ports via the Panama and Suez Canal. The consultant looked at the vessel emissions, the truck emissions, and the train emissions. We took the methodology, we actually gave it to the US EPA, to the California Air Resources Board, to the South Coast Air Quality Management District. They had some suggestions on calculations and methodology. Nobody put their imprint of approval on it, but we did accept their suggestions into our calculations and model. And in the vast majority of cases and scenarios, West Coast ports were the most advantageous in terms of limiting greenhouse gas emissions. So California's challenge really, I think, going forward, and will be a challenge in implementing the governor's executive order, and is a challenge for the local air districts and their policies, and for the port authorities and their policies, is how do we adopt these changes, these policies that have an environmental benefit and have clear, beneficial, hopefully, climate goals without driving cargo away, without driving the jobs away, without driving the tax revenue away, and inadvertently, again, if our model is correct, increasing greenhouse gas emissions and doing the opposite of what you actually set out to achieve. So from our standpoint, and something that we will be advocating in the coming months and years, and something that was articulated in a coalition letter that went to the governor and to the legislature about 2 months ago now, a total of 52 organizations signed on to our letter, is we need to move away from the old command and control type of system of environmental regulation and take a more holistic approach at the situation in adopting regulations. We have to be able, from a supply chain and port standpoint, remain competitive, keep the jobs, grow the jobs, at the same time as minimizing and reducing our environmental impact, any climate change impact. And that's going to be a different line of thought, I think, for regulators who kind of have this singularity of purpose, as opposed to looking at everything in its totality. But it's something that we definitely are going to be trying to push in order for the state to be a success and a true leader. Because I think if we can show the environmental benefits at the same time as growing the economy, then people will truly follow California's example. And with that, like Bill, I'd be happy to answer any kind of questions.
Thanks, John. You gave me a lot to talk about, a lot to respond to, as you always do. And what I want to do is start by looking at the cost element. Now, you said very accurately that due to the environmental regulations that are faced by the marine terminals for cargo handling equipment, zero emission cargo handling equipment, truckers for near zero to zero, trucks, railroads for cleaner engines, shipping lines for plugging into alternative power, et cetera, billions of dollars. Okay, and that's certainly a fact. Now, will the terminal operator pass on to the BCO dollar for dollar every investment that's made in cargo handling equipment, et cetera. But I want to put this into context of how much does it cost to ship a container now, if you are an importer, through the West Coast compared to last year at this time. Last year at this time, and this is a number that has been the way it is for years, about $1,500. So you're an importer, you pay the shipping line $1,500 to carry your container from Shanghai to LA Long Beach. What is that rate today? It's almost 4,000, 3,800 plus per FEU, per container. So, we're talking about more than a doubling, 2.5 times. That happened overnight, and we could talk about this all day with the carriers and the shippers or whatever, but that is a very real cost. Has that prevented importers from shipping through the West Coast? No, not at all. Add on to that the unfortunate tariffs that have really hit the entire U.S. economy, but LA Long Beach specifically, due to the U.S.-China trade war, the Trump trade war, which began in late 2018. You're talking about tariffs as high as 25% on the contents of what's in that container, per item. Those are huge costs. So when you look at all of that in comparison to what is being invested by the ports, the terminal operators, the carriers, et cetera, and try to calculate it on a per FEU basis, I think you're going to see a huge difference. And then I'll just conclude a response on this subject to what you indicated, John, that if we're going to be a leader in climate change, which California is, there have to be followers. And I remember it was about, 10 years ago, I was asked to be on a port environmental working group, which included, LA Long Beach port folks, specialists. And we were called together at the end of our venture to Austin, Texas, to discuss these very issues as what can the ports do to reduce climate change, to reduce all of the health risk pollutants. And I remember the representative from the Port of Long Beach was discussing in detail what you just discussed. And then the discussion moved to a representative of another port on the East Coast. And that lady said, listen, we don't have time and money for all of this. You know, if we're told to do something and bring in some kind of environmental regulation from the feds, we'll do it. But if not, you know, we're not going to waste our time with this. So I have a feeling that California is going to continue to be a leader. LA, Long Beach, Seattle, Tacoma, Oakland will continue to be leaders. But the followers will only follow us when they are, you know, required to do so by.
Yeah, you know, Bill, I don't think I disagree with you on that last point too much. Other than I think the political makeup of some states is starting to change. As maybe if you know, there's some that are saying that the Californians that are leaving California and going to Texas are making it more of a blue state than a red state. And we'll see how that plays out in the presidential election and in the race for U.S. Senate, whether they end up electing a Democrat down there. If we end up with a Biden presidency, I think we'll see some additional change, or if you want to call it that, some people wouldn't call it leadership on a federal level. I don't think we'll get to the California standards. So, you know, we may be out there on our own for a bit. I will say with respect to the issue of the cargo coming in to the West Coast, I would just point out that at the end of this year, we're still going to be below 2019 volume levels, according to the projections of some of the port directors. And you know, with respect to market share, we've got a trend that goes back not 20 years, but we're getting closer to 20 years. We're somewhere, I think, between 15 and 20 years of declining market share. So let's see where things are. You know, 2020 is far different year, and the motivation for moving cargo, I think, is different than in past years, whether it's replenishment, whether it's fear of a second wave, whether it's a change in shopping habits because people just aren't going to stores anymore. So I think we need to see a couple of years to see if this is a changing trend line at all. And you know, and since the coronavirus, we're just turning the corner on it. You know, supposedly. You know, maybe all that'll change in the coming weeks, but it looks like we've got some pretty dark months ahead of us. So maybe 2021 will also be a very strange, mixed up year.
Right, and John, I agree with you 100% on your political analysis. I mean, you know, let's face it, under Trump, he has intentionally neutered or just thrown out by executive order every possible legal and illegal way of undoing what President Obama did. That you know, dark approach to the environment hopefully will end. But yeah, so let's see what happens November 3rd. But there are a couple of points I wanted to respond to you on, and then we're starting to get some good questions in too. The most important point that you mentioned is that this trend of loss of market share is going on 20 years now. And, you know, you're right. It began, I would say, with the longshore labor negotiations, coastwide labor negotiations, back when we had a significant disruption here about 20 years ago. And what was present at that time was the growth of intermodal transportation really made the West Coast the preferred gateway, the dominant gateway for U.S. imports from Asia. I think that it was something like 80% in the 90s. early 2000s, something like 80% of US imports from Asia went through the West Coast. And, you know, everybody was happy. Every major retailer, importer had a distribution center here, a national distribution center on the West Coast. But then with the 2002 contract negotiations and the ports were shut down, let's say, which they were for, you know, a period of time, the national retailers realized, gee, you know, we have all our eggs in one basket. So they shifted very rapidly to a four-corner strategy, you know, Seattle, Tacoma, LA, Long Beach, New York, New Jersey, Savannah, Charleston, and throw in Norfolk there too. So that, I mean, that was probably bound to happen eventually, but it was accelerated by the labor disruptions. So that—
I would just say, Bill, real quick, that was quickly followed by a rail meltdown a couple of years later.
Correct. Yeah, when you had the railroads merging, and it's interesting on the rail line where if you have a problem today in Houston, tomorrow it's already backed up to the West Coast. So that once again compound. What it did is it emphasized to carriers, as well as especially though to the importers, that you have to spread your shipments out around the country. So that, you know, this was bound, I don't think, you know, in the long term, it was sustainable to have 80% of US imports from Asia moving through the West Coast gateway. So, but, you know, did it have to come, did the market share have to be as intensive as it was? No, you know, certainly not. So then if you're satisfied with that answer, then we do have a couple of questions here. Where do you see our weakest link in the supply chain? What part of the supply chain must we focus on to have the largest impact in increasing efficiency, especially in LA Long Beach? Well, I'm going to say the weakest link is the marine terminal, not because the terminal operators are doing anything wrong, but because they're at the center of everything. They're at the fulcrum. They interact directly with the shipping line, with the trucker, with the railroads, certainly with the BCOs and with their warehouses. So by the mere fact that everything comes together at the marine terminal, they will be the weakest link. But in order to, and I think, in fact, I know that you talked to Wesson Mubarak, the Harbor Trucking Association. He's been working very closely with the terminal operators, individually as well as a group. And they have made significant improvements in recent years in cost and efficiencies to help the trucker. So it's going to take that type of effort with all members of the supply chain. And we have both ports have the working group, the efficiency task force group, where the different sectors of the supply chain come together on a regular basis, and each sector discusses its problems, its challenges, makes suggestions, and, you know, then that information is chewed on and massaged and come back with solutions, and it's working. It's working slowly, but it is working. So that's how I would answer that question. And then there is another question here. Is there any chance the International Maritime Organization will clean up the air as they have tried to do with the requirement of low sulfur fuel? Yeah, definitely. In fact, what the experts in this area have been saying is that so far, much of the effort has been in the area of low sulfur, you know, the health risk aspects of the pollution from vessels, you know, meaning the NOx, SOx, and particulate matter. But now they're going full force on the greenhouse gas emissions, which directly impact climate change. And from, you know, what we're hearing, that it won't be very long before the IMO comes out with some specific greenhouse gas measures. So we'll stay tuned for that.
If I could, on the first question, Bill, that you raised, I would agree with you in terms of the central location that the terminal operators are. I think I would take issue in terms of describing them, which you didn't, but it was in terms of how the question was framed, a weak link. You know, they're at the intersection of multiple modes of transportation and cargo flow. So if there isn't a place to put the cargo, it stays on the terminal. If there aren't chassis, you can't get them off. The ocean carriers are reporting that they're completely full and booked. And we've had vessel operators searching for terminals because terminals are just out of space. So they, as you say, they're just getting squeezed. They're caught in the middle. And their role should be as high velocity transit points as opposed to a storage facility or anything else. In terms of the IMO, God bless them, and I hope they move forward and provide a solution on an international basis. It's just not going to be fast enough for California. And California is going to do what it thinks it can do and extend its authority and jurisdiction, I am sure, in very creative ways. So, but I hope IMO is able to move forward.
And I agree with you, John. Yeah, California is always going to be a leader, both nationally and internationally. Although, if we look at the European ports and some of the Asian ports, they have been extremely progressive on the pollution front. So they, in fact, we get some very good ideas from those ports. So, and there is an international organization where the ports from around the world share their best practices. So yeah, this is not just a California issue. This is a global issue, and the individual ports, you know, will address it each in their own particular way. So that's that. Yeah, and you rightly said that this issue is not going to go away. California is going to continue to be, you know, to set its own path. And what I would say to you is that that's good, because if we don't, who will?
No debate there.
Okay, and you know, on another point that you raised, and I wanted to comment on that, is about the commerce. You know, what does this mean going forward? At least for right now, and we are going to see, I'm sure, continued growth in e-commerce and online shopping, that LA Long Beach is really well suited to be the gateway for that type of cargo. One, you know, speed to market, of course, is crucial, but if you're going to ship to anywhere in the country, technically you can do it through LA Long Beach. There are intermodal rail connections to all of the major parts of the country, from the East Coast to the Midwest to the Mid-South to the Gulf Coast to Texas. You know, and unlike the northern ports, Seattle, Tacoma, and Vancouver, Prince Rupert, they're somewhat limited by the rail networks as to which regions they can serve. So LA Long Beach, you know, as the e-commerce trend continues, will be the preferred gateway, I'm sure. Although, you know, we'll eventually see more of a return to Four Corners routing too, as the purchases of consumers tend to be more in line with traditional purchasing habits. We can say that.
So if there's anyone else who has any questions, I invite you to raise your hand or unmute your mic, and feel free to ask a question of Bill or John at this time.
And another good point that John had raised concerning the warehouses. And, let's face it, the warehouses are struggling to handle the volumes that they're getting in. One of the reasons is their productivity has also been impacted by COVID-19. They had a significant loss of workers due to the virus. And then secondly, those workers who are showing up every day for the job, they are spaced further apart for safety precautions, which is, I think this is going to long outlive COVID-19. They were crammed too close together, so they've been spaced out. So that's going to have a natural impact on productivity. And it must happen that way. I mean, that's just the right thing to do.
So are we going to see an influx in building of new and bigger warehouses to be able to handle these increased volumes and account for this additional space in between workers?
John, do you want to start with that and then I could jump in?
Mark, great question. I'm not sure. All I know is that the permitting process in California is measured in geologic terms. So we'll be on to our next pandemic, I think, maybe by the time that they're actually built. Okay,
let me respond first to the sarcasm in John's. I, have been to a number of national industrial real estate conferences, where all the warehouse operators get together and talk shop. And invariably, one of the speeches is, well, you can't ship, you can't build warehouses in California anymore. It's too costly, the environmental restrictions, on and on and on and on. And then every session after that is how LA County, well, first of all, the largest concentration of industrial warehouse space by far is in Southern California, 1.8 billion square feet. Chicago is second at a little more than 1 billion square feet. And then it drops from there. So invariably then after we hear this gloom and doom prediction, LA County always has the lowest vacancy rate. You're talking in bad times 2% and in good times less than 1%. And you're talking, and then you hear about 2 million, 3 million square feet facilities being built in the Inland Empire. First the Inland Empire West, and then the Inland Empire East, and then the desert, and then the high desert. So despite all this gloom and doom, we continue to see growth in the industrial real estate sector. And then to answer Mark's question, I really think that, yes, as with everything, with air travel, these sectors of the economy will be changed forever due to COVID-19. But I don't think that's going to translate to fewer warehouses being built, or that they're going to start building 2 million square foot warehouses in LA County, because there's no room for that. I think probably what will happen is we'll see more and more automation within these facilities. Now, of course, that's costly, but that way you could, it's like Long Beach Container Terminal or Tray Pack, which are automated. You're going to get a lot more density. You're going to move a lot more product through the same amount of space. So that's my guess on that subject.
Any questions from our attendees? Just unmute your microphone and feel free to ask. This is your time.
See, John, I told you should have prepared longer remarks.
No, this has been a great event, gentlemen. I really appreciate your comments today and your insights. It is definitely a moving target, and appreciate your tracking on it as we go forward. It's critical for us. Now, I was wondering if the replacement for the Gerald Desmond Bridge was going to come up in your comments, but I didn't hear it. I mean, it's now up, but we can all take a deep sigh of relief that the old one didn't fall before the new one got finished. But do we see it helping solve some of this congestion issues that you had mentioned in your talk?
Yeah, very good point, Mark. In fact, I talked to some terminal operators, and they said the mere fact that the construction is done. I don't know if the demolition is going to have any major impact on cargo velocity, but the fact that the construction is done and those trucks have moved on, and you don't have to get off the bridge and then get back on it, that may translate to as much as a 10 to 15 minute improvement overall turn times. And that's spread out, among the 12 terminals. So yeah, it should already be having a noticeable impact. If the cargo volumes weren't as high as they are right now, I think we would have seen an almost immediate reflection of that in the monthly turn time rates that the HTA comes out with.
I would just add also job well done by the Port of Long Beach in getting that bridge built.
Yeah, and it's a pretty drive too. I did it a couple of weekends ago just because, and I can't wait for the pedestrian and bikeway to open up so you can go out there and take a good long look. You can only look so far to the right or left as you're driving, so we'll make it safe for those picturesque views going forward. So. Well, with that, I don't see anyone else with a question. We got count of 5 to answer a question, and then I'm going to end today's discussion. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, seeing none. I'm gonna again thank you, John and Bill, for your comments today. Thank you again to our sponsor, the Port of Long Beach, the port of choice. Remember, although some conditions and restrictions apply, if you haven't yet held membership in the FTA in the last 18 months, or you're an individual who left a company that was a member, you're eligible for a special promotion of a 50% off our corporate and one-person company representative rates. That's $600 normally, now to $300, or $300 to $150. So sign up now. We have upcoming events again on the October 27th. Steve Hughes talking specifically about some of these soaring spot rates that John and Bill talked about. George Garcia, November 18th, regarding the Centers for Excellence and Expertise. And then December 8th, the centralized examination stations in the San Pedro Bay are going to talk about how to keep your cargo moving through the exam process. We look to have the Port of Long Beach talking more about the Gerald Desmond Bridge and or replacement. I guess it's really not the Gerald Desmond Bridge anymore, but the replacement bridge in December, and then KMPG talking about forced labor in January, as well as blockchain and emerging technologies. So with that, I'm going to say thank you again to our speakers, and wish you a wonderful day, and thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Bill.